my, we just witnessed a lot of carnage in week 13. Plenty of players were injured, and now you head into a week 14 where there's 6 teams on bye, making this week's waiver wire one that you're going to want to pay attention to. Let's discuss. Let's start with the Seahawks backfield and a player you should be looking to add in Travis Homer. Now, Homer did miss this past week with an injury and illness, but it was more so the injury because he actually practiced it. This LP means limited participant on Friday, and he's trending to play next week. And now this matters because both Kenneth Walker and DJ Dallas, the other 2 running backs on the depth chart, got hurt in the last game. Now, Dallas actually returned to the game, but he was significantly limited. Tony Jones, the RB4 on the team, had to play, and he's not expected to see much usage moving forward. It's actually Homer that's played ahead of DJ Dallas all season long, seeing over 65% of the backup snaps. So if Kenneth Walker ends up missing, you're going to want Homer because he'll be the RB1. He's a solid pass catcher on the number 8 offense in the NFL. That's worth something. So grab him and then also get this next RB on the West Coast. And that would be Joshua Kelly, who he returned from injury a few weeks ago in week 12. And when he returned, he ended up being the running back 2 on the team. There's 3 RBs still involved with the rookie Isaiah Spiller. He played 22% of the snaps. But his role just increased this past week. It actually doubled. Because as you can see right here, he played 31 snaps compared to Austin Eckler 46. This was 41% of the snaps, and he was the only other running back not named Austin Eckler to see a snap for this Chargers team. I mean, what this basically means is he is the clear handcuff running back for this team. Now, heading into the fantasy playoffs, you want most teams handcuffs, especially if they are the guy who will get all the work if the other guy misses. Now, it is worth mentioning a few things. For starters, this schedule for the Chargers in the fantasy playoffs is rough. They legitimately have, as of right now, the worst schedule for running backs heading into the rest of the season. And in the fantasy playoffs, they'll be facing the Titans, the Colts, and the Rams. Those are 3 of the top 8 run defenses in the NFL. It is a really difficult spot. So Kelly is worth the add as a handcuff, especially if you own Eckler, but don't be spending too much on him. And similar can actually be said for this next wide receiver. And that's DJ Chark, who's coming off of his best usage of the entire year. He returned from injury a couple weeks ago, and he just saw a season high 84% of the snaps. That's what this 64 is right here, just 2 less than Amon-Ra St. Brown. He basically was never leaving the field. He's a clear starter. And now what this led to was also season high usage. He had 5 catches on 6 targets for 98 receiving yards. That's a season best. Now here's what you need to know. Like I said, he's a clear starter, and the rookie Jamison Williams returned this past week, but he's expected to take snaps from Josh Reynolds, not DJ Chark. Chark now has 2 top 20 finishes over his 5 healthy games this year, but that's not even the best part. The best part is that the Detroit Lions wide receivers have the 4th easiest remaining schedule. 3 of their next 4 games are against bottom 10 secondaries, including the Bears, number 30 ranked secondary in the fantasy playoffs. So Chark is most definitely worth an add, especially in any 12-team league or bigger, and so is this next guy. And this one's somewhat complicated, but let's talk through it. It's Nico Collins. Look, Brandon Cooks was out this past week, and it led to a career day for Collins. He ended up leading the team in snaps, and he saw a career-high 11 targets. He's seen 10 targets 2 other times in his career. This is a new high at 11. Now, this performance translated to him seeing 30% of the Texans' targets. That was top 10, a target share, top 10 on the week. And this usage might continue because Brandon Cooks was out, and yeah, he had a calf injury, but the injury report actually said it was for personal reasons. And as of just a couple of weeks ago, he was frustrated. He wanted to be traded, but they gave him too big of a contract, and he doesn't really want to be on this team. There's a chance as a veteran that he kind of just sits out the rest of the season with this quote-unquote calf injury. And another positive for Collins is that the Texans have the easiest playoff schedule for wide receivers down the stretch. He's going to have the number 1 playoff schedule. Now, the problem is obviously his quarterbacks in Kyle Allen and maybe even Davis Mills comes back in. And only about a third of his targets, those 11, like 3 or 4 of the targets were actually catchable. All he had was 3 catches this past week. That's not great, but the volume alone is worth an add, especially in deeper leagues. Now, the overall best add this week is going to be James Cook. At any single position, he is the number 1 add because of what he just did this past Thursday night. He ended up playing just 1 less snap than Devin Singletary, 43% of the snaps in this game, and here's what it led to. It led to 20 total touches, over 100 total yards, and 16.5 fantasy points. This was more usage than Devin Singletary. 7 more touches. He saw basically all the receiving game work, taking away those routes from Singletary. And now one more thing. Mr. James Cook, the rookie, ranks 7th, top 10 in yards per touch at the running back position. That is productivity. He is fantastic. Now, those yards per touch exactly are 6.7. That's fantastic. Compared to Devin Singletary, who sees 5, which 5 isn't bad, but it's still almost 2 less per touch is what Singletary is getting compared to James Cook. James Cook has just been fantastic, and he's slowly starting to get a lot more usage. And of course, it's the Bills with Josh Allen, a great offense, the number 4 rush offense in the NFL. So go get Cook right now. He's a number 1 priority, and get this next RB. Now, this next RB in Mike Boone, he's more of a stash because look, as of next week, he might become the guy in Denver. He returned this past week, and he played 23% of the snaps. But more importantly, he immediately became the RB2 on this team, significantly playing more than Marlon Mack. And let's remember, Melvin Gordon was cut by this team. Chase Edmonds is going to potentially miss the rest of the season, meaning that you're going to get some significant usage for Mike Boone. And so far in 2022, he's averaging 6.8 yards yards per touch. That's top 10, right? We just saw James Cook was fantastic, averaging 6.7, and then he saw his role increase out of nowhere last week. Well, this might happen with Mike Boone because Latavius Murray has not been good this year. He's averaging just 4.3 yards per touch. That's 47th amongst all running backs in the NFL. Highly inefficient. So add Mike Boone and his productive per touch usage before he starts to get some more snaps. And then grab his teammate Greg Dulcich, who is the #1 tight end ad of the week. He's still available in over 60% of leagues, believe it or not. Dulcich just ended up putting up one of his best days of the season, his second best day, arguably his best day, having 6 catches, 85 yards on 8 targets, a team high 8 targets. His 14.5 fantasy points as of right now before the Monday night game kicks off is the most for a tight end on this week. He is the tight end 1 this week. Reminder, he's a rookie. And it's likely Denver's going to continue to use the rookie because Cortland Sutton got hurt in this game. KJ Hamler hasn't been playing. They don't have many weapons. Even Jerry Jeudy is banged up and limited. So add the rookie tight end who just played 70+% of the snaps this past week, and then get this next wide receiver. And that's Chase Claypool, who's worth an ad. He's available in 55% of leagues, and he appears to be the clear #1 receiver for the Bears. Now, this was his first game without Darnell Mooney, who is now out for the season, and Claypool saw 6 targets, by far the most on the team, despite missing like a quarter of play due to an injury. In the first half, on a big 3rd down, he goes over the middle of the field. He ends up fumbling because he injures his lower body, and then he basically misses the rest of that half. He was on pace to by far lead this team in snaps, probably play a season high with the Bears around 80% of the snaps, which is something you want to be adding off the waivers as a #1 receiver for Justin Fields. But just be careful here. You don't want to be overspending, similar to some other players we talked about earlier, because Chicago still ranks dead last in passes per game. It's crazy. 21.5 passes per game is unreal. Basically 2 less than the 2nd worst team in Atlanta. And the Bears have the 3rd worst playoff schedule for wide receivers. So again, don't be overspending here. If you can pick them up for nothing on your waiver wire, if you have a middle of the pack priority pickup or something along those lines, just try and get him, put him on your bench, and see what happens heading into the playoffs. Another veteran wide receiver worth stashing is Corey Davis, who he returned from injury in week 12 2 weeks ago. And when he returned, he immediately went back to being the wide receiver 2 on this team. He played 71% of the snaps. It led to 3 targets, but this past week, his role increased. Corey Davis just played 69 snaps. That equated to 81% of the snaps. So he saw his usage rise, and he saw 10 targets, a season high 10 targets. And this 10 targets was a great game. 5 catches, 85 yards. He puts up 13.5 fantasy points, and he now has a top 30 finish in 50% of his games. He's played in 8 healthy games, and 4 of those he's finished as a top 30 wide receiver, which is more than a flex-worthy play. And this is the Jets' schedule the next 4 weeks. The Bills are not in the fantasy playoffs, so that's fine, but then heading into weeks 15 against the Lions, 16 against the Jags, and 17 against the Seahawks, those are 3 bottom 10 secondaries. So add Davis and then get his rookie teammate as well. And that's Donovan Knight, who is still available. He was a big waiver wire ad last week, but he's still available in over 60% of leagues, even though he just went for 100 total yards yet again. So now check this out. James Robinson was not active last week. He was active this week, and they said they were going to use 3 different running backs, so some people were scared about starting Knight. But Knight still played the most snaps. He saw 55% of the snaps. This led to fantastic usage. He had 20 touches, 5 catches, which was good to see, and over 100 yards, 118 yards on 20 touches to be exact. But that's not all. Because heading into this week, Michael Carter was ruled doubtful, as you can see right here. But not only was he doubtful and missed the game, he did not practice a single day during the week, meaning that he's not even probably close to returning for week 14. And in week 14, if he misses, Knight will continue to be the starting running back against the Bills' bottom 10 run defense, the number 24 run defense in Buffalo. So grab White and then this next running back as well. And that would be Cam Akers. And man, this backfield is frustrating. Cam Akers this past week, kind of out of nowhere, sees a season high 71% of the snaps. Now this led to 18 touches, which is great for Cam Akers, which is great for any running back. If we get some consistency, you want to add that. But here's the thing. Just a week ago in week 12, Kyren Williams was basically seeing the exact same usage, playing over 70% of the snaps. Cam Akers seeming like he was on the outs here, so this is not consistent. So it's difficult to trust either running back, but we must respect the fact that Akers saw 90% of the early down usage in this game and at least say that both of them deserve to be on rosters. And that 90% of the snaps on early downs is important because the Rams have the 4th easiest running back schedule heading into the fantasy playoffs. They'll face the Packers and the Chargers in the fantasy playoffs. Both of those are bottom 5 run defenses, so whichever one of these running backs between Kyren Williams and Cam Akers sees the usage is going to have a very beneficial matchup. So hold both of these dudes. More than likely, Cam Akers is the one who's more available after not seeing usage last week on your waiver wire, and then get this next player. And that's going to be a rookie, Jahan Dotson, who was a hot ad at the beginning of the season, and he just played 79% of the snaps. Now, that 79% of the snaps is important because it's the most he's played since suffering an injury in week 4. He appears to finally be healthy. And this increased usage led to 16.5 fantasy points. He found the end zone on a season high 9 targets. He now quietly has 4 top 25 finishes over 6 healthy games. He's a player to be stashing right now. He's a player that I know is going to be a sleeper second-year player add from 2023 fantasy football. It's already in the back of my mind. Put it in yours. So go get him, stash him, and then stash this next player. And we go from a rookie to a veteran, and that is Michael Gallup, who's still available in over 50% of leagues. And now Gallup in back-to-back weeks has set a season high in fantasy points. 11 points last week, 18 this week on the back of 2 touchdowns, team high 7 targets. He only had 23 yards, but he still produced. And since returning from injury, he's seen his snaps increased. He's seen his usage in 2 wide receiver sets increased, and it's led to 3 out of 4 games of 7+ targets. He appears to be healthy, which is perfect timing because his fantasy schedule is fantastic. Next week, he'll face the Texans' dead last ranked secondary. Then in the first week of the fantasy playoffs, he faces the Jaguars' 30th ranked secondary. And then in the fantasy championship against the Titans, for many people, he'll face the Titans' 27th ranked secondary. It is fantastic. Go get him and consider this next quarterback. And now this quarterback is worth adding because his starter got injured, and that's Lamar Jackson, who's going to be potentially out anywhere from days to weeks to the rest of the season is what the report said. And that man worth the pickup is Tyler Huntley, who actually started 5 games last year when Lamar was injured. And last year in a week 15 matchup against the Green Bay Packers, Huntley threw for 2 touchdowns. He ran for 73 yards and ran for 2 touchdowns. He was actually the #1 overall quarterback, scoring a whopping 36 points in week 15 of last year. Now in his other 4 starts, he failed to top 16 fantasy points in either of them. He was basically as average as a quarterback gets, but that upside is there. And he has the fantasy cheat codes at the quarterback position. If we scroll down here to when he started his first game, 40 rushing yards, he had 40+ rushing yards in every single start, 50+ in his final 3 starts. So you can rely on his rushing yards, which now you kind of just need something from a touchdown standpoint. If he ends up being the starter for a week or 2, he'll get the Browns' number 30 ranked defense in week 15, the start of the fantasy playoffs. It could be interesting, especially for your super flex leagues. Now, maybe you were eliminated in one of your leagues from the playoffs. Well, I have fantastic news for you because Prize Picks is a great way to stay active in fantasy football. And Prize Picks is simply just taking the over-under on a player's stat or their fantasy points. There's a bunch of different types of things you can do up here, different sports as well. But the big one here, Justin Herbert over a half a passing yard. They have a special prop for this week. He just has to throw 1 passing yard for you to win. So it's a free bet. And the lovely people at Prize Picks, in which we've been working with for over 2 years now, they're giving you a free bet up to $100. If you put in 20, they'll give you a $20 bet right back. You put in 100, they'll give you a $100 bet right back. So you just simply use the link in the description to prizepicks.com, use the code SAL22, SAL22, and you'll get a free bet up to $100, and you can put that money, part of it, on the Justin Herbert prop right here, and it's free. You might as well use it or lose it. Now, potentially a sneaky player worth adding is going to be Khalil Herbert, who's eligible to return in week 16 off of the IR. He is basically purely a playoff fantasy football stash, and here's why. Herbert is top 5 in running back productivity, yards per touch, true yards per carry, and he's top 10 in broken tackles, but that's not even the best part. He has the 5th easiest playoff schedule, which is why we want him. He faces the Eagles, number 14 run defense, but then the good matchups, the Bills, number 24 run defense, the Lions, number 26 run defense in the fantasy championship. Now, obviously, David Montgomery is out there, but this is more so a handcuff who has upside. He's had nice weeks when Montgomery is even healthy. But if something was to happen to Montgomery in the next 2 weeks, well, Herbert's going to step right in and be a #1 running back on the #2 rush offense in the NFL, and he's a productive one at that. He's worth a stash. And the exact same thing could be said about this rookie wide receiver in Jameson Williams, who made his debut this past week on Sunday. He was very limited. He only ran a couple of routes, 2 routes, 1 target, only played 8 snaps in this game, but that's going to rise. Because after the game, the head coach said that he'll be seeing more usage next week, but don't expect him to be anywhere near 100% until probably like week 15 or week 16. But that potential for him to be much healthier then is important because Williams can end up being a league winner for you. He's a fantastic deep threat, and the Lions rank top 10 right now in the NFL in deep attempts per game. And a reminder, last season in college, Williams had over 1,500 yards. And like we mentioned earlier for his teammate DJ Shark, Detroit has the 4th easiest playoff schedule at the wide receiver position. So if he was to return even for your fantasy championship in week 17, he's worth a stash because if he puts up 20 points in that performance to end the year, yeah, he's technically a league winner for you. So now these are players that you should add, and it seems crazy since we're all the way in week 14, but there's actually a good amount of decent plays. Like Zonovan Knight, you picked him up, you just got 16 points out of him this past week. Now, if you also want to know the best defenses and tight end and quarterback stashes and even running back handcuffs for the playoffs, well then check out this video right here. It's going to set you up to not only win the next couple of weeks, but to win your fantasy championship.